Hello and welcome to another episode of Sinews of War. In the previous episode we had the Ottoman Empire come back for round 2, declaring war on us once again. All of our allies joined us fortunately, and that was on top of our existing war with Russia, in which we were making an attack north out of St. Petersburg with Uwacha's army. The enemy though proved to have near unbreakable morale despite their lack of leadership, and although we had a heroic effort from many of our troops, our main force there was defeated in battle. Things went better down in the south near the Ukraine, where the arrival of Vos and more reinforcements allowed us to start clearing up the Russians on that front. But then we had yet another war when the 13 colonies were attacked by Sweden, and we had to join the war with Sweden in support of our ally. The last thing we saw was the preparation of the long-planned attack on the Maratha Confederacy, with our forces now on the border. A word on these directives from the Director General. Only the first one matters. That is to say that if we achieve the grand objective of seizing India, then the precise manner of how we do it matters little. We can do it as per his 10-page essay, or we can do it in a manner that fits each situation as it presents itself. I can heartily assure you that one way is more productive than the other. In particular, let me pass on a little wisdom from the conquest of Mysore. If you treat the locals in the way directed by Mr. Grotius, you will quickly find a blade at your throat and an elephant at the end of your bed. These Indian devils don't forget even the slightest wrong you've put up against them, deliberate or not. They multiply in tandem with their street rats, and they value taking your life above preserving their own. So, when you come into control of enemy settlements, the advised process of establishing a local administration can be effectively ignored. Much faster to simply suppress dissent by force and leave a few of your own troops as rulers. I understand the intentions of our director, I really do. However, matters of delicacy, like politics with the natives, are best done when all armies that march in their support are already crushed. Only then can the result we truly need be agreed upon, you see? Ultimately, I leave such decisions to you for the present time. But at every moment be aware that this company has no room for compromise or compassion while a state of war is afoot. The Director General's methods have failed us enough times already. I suggest you follow one of our company's few positive examples and choose mine instead. The Ottomans are on the move, as you can see, a number of stacks appearing to move up towards Istanbul, so surely they're coming to take their capital back. Got a few forces inside, and we're going to start recruiting even more because we need them desperately, since we may end up facing 4 stacks very soon. The problem with this whole thing is that if they take it and break through, we don't have anything on the interior in the Balkans in order to try and stop them with all our forces over here on the front with Russia. So I wanted to see if there's some way we can get out of this using diplomacy. First, I just went to the Ottomans and said, would you like to not attack me? And unfortunately for me, they do still want to invade. So then I thought, well, let's see if Russia wants to not attack me, because I could just pull forces away. Now, I didn't expect them to accept this, but they actually did. I probably should have actually put some terms in. I was just being flippant and expecting them to reject the deal, just wanted to confirm it. But no, suddenly we actually do get peace with Russia. So that's an interesting development. It's going to make things a little bit easier. They refuse trade, since they absolutely hate me, and the fact they're hostile means this peace could be very fragile, but we're going to trust it for the time being. The really interesting thing is that we're keeping St. Petersburg and Kiev in this deal. I also realised I should have taken Riga off them as well. Should have done that before just offering peace. So we've actually sort of won something in this war. We have weakened the Russians and taken territory from them despite our loss of manpower. So up in St. Petersburg, we're now going to start consolidating our forces once again and recovering them, putting a new stack together from the locals so that we still have an army up there. Meanwhile, Vos and Geiden are going to go on a little road trip down towards Istanbul, leaving all of the reserve armies that I have up here to defend the Russian border, because, as I said, I think the peace could be fragile. I suspect they may attack, so I want to leave a significant force in the newly captured regions just in case something happens. Now, over in America, I'm going to reboot my attempts to go and invade South America. You may remember that last time I failed because all of my men got left behind when the ships sailed out, but this time they're definitely on board and we're going to head down. It's our victory condition to take all of the South American territories. So we're going to basically prepare for that. The big problem is that it's occupied by New Spain, and New Spain have a powerful fleet here in the Caribbean. It's smaller than the fleet led by Calumba, but as you can see comparing the units here, our fleet has lots of small ships. It's big in terms of the number of ships, but low in terms of its number of guns. So I thought we need to actually modernize this fleet. This fleet's been with us since the beginning of the campaign. We need to build some of the newer ships and the larger ships and get them into play. So I'm going to use that as another slight delay before we make that attack, just to make sure we have the strength. And on the topic of navies, I've also got Alamondo, who was blockading the Russian ports in the Crimea, who can now come over to harass the Ottomans, just going to raid their trade to make some extra cash. Now on the Ottoman turn, they don't attack Istanbul. In fact, one of their stacks actually leaves the battlefront, so that was interesting, giving me some extra time. The Swedish offer peace. They'll even give me some money, but I have to give them some region. At first I was like, what region is that? I don't even remember seeing a region under that name, but that's what I keep calling St. Petersburg. It's actually Ingria is the name of the region. So a very bad deal. I have to give them a region in exchange for enough money, which is basically the tax income of one turn from that region. So that's not going to be happening, but I thought maybe they'll just go to peace with me anyway. Like, being at war with Sweden doesn't help us in any way. We have no need to conquer their territory, but they don't want a regular peace. Now the Russians moved a stack up to my border here in the Balkans, which is a bit suspicious, I think you'll agree, but we are literally going to ignore it because I want to press on towards the multiple Ottoman stacks further down south. So Vos and Geiden will keep running that way. I'm going to keep recruiting forces in the Balkans as well, just in case something goes wrong, so we'll have reserves around the place. Now, because I'm at war with Sweden, I realised what I could do is take all the forces from around St. Petersburg and just invade Finland. It looks like the Swedish are not going to stop me from doing this. There are no stacks on the way down or anything. They're probably down near their capital, so hopefully that'll be an easy steal from them. Now finally, this is something I should have done ages ago. I wanted to show where I am in the tech tree for anyone who may be interested. And the basic summary is we're about halfway or just over halfway through everything. A lot of the tech research getting pretty slow now because I've stopped investing in universities, since a lot of the late game techs just aren't necessary at this point. We already have a technological advantage, so we can make more money by getting some more of the industrial techs and things like that, but overall not really necessary. And a lot of the military techs later on aren't really necessary either. I want to get some of the naval ones though, so we can catch up in the naval race, since a lot of our ships are inferior right now. So that's where we are, and we'll keep progressing. We have so many universities, we're sure to win that arms race. Shame we won't get to try out the good old king's little plan, eh? I have a certain theory about land wars in Russia I wanted to test, especially marching on Moscow. Maybe we'll still end up doing it one day. Can't imagine the Ruskies appreciate losing half their farms to the likes of you. The king has ambitions on every square inch of the world, as far as I can tell. Why try to convince people to work with you when you can just invade and foster a little hatred instead? Although I bet the man thinks his foreign subjects like him. So high and mighty he can't even hear the clamour of the masses below. Question is, do we lower him or raise the masses? So it's time now to get things started in India. We are sending our official declaration of war to the Maratha Confederacy, who surround our territory in Mysore. Sweden saying they're joining the war with us there, but since they're already at war with us, not a big difference, and I didn't call any of my own allies into this, since it's really going to be a private matter for the East India Company. So the first move is going to be Costa moving to besiege this settlement. He has an advantage thanks to the reserve army coming in from the west there. So although there's a big enemy army inside, it's a situation where we can win if we make an assault and are successful. Before I looked at that though, I wanted to see where De Beer's army would end up. So I moved up to besiege this next settlement, and it's got a full army inside as well, this time a more challenging assault. Since Costa has the easier time of it, what I thought I would do here is continue that siege and not go into a siege assault, which is a bit dangerous since Maratha might reinforce, but what we're going to try and do is get Costa out of his siege to go over and reinforce that before the Maratha do, if we can. So first I put all of the cannons from our reserve army into the leading army so that we can do a siege assault with the maximum number of guns possible, so we can totally destroy their walls. And then they've got lots of melee troops, so we're probably going to have to do a really dangerous assault on the fort where we just charge in. So if you can make enough breaches, we'll be able to attack on multiple flanks, but the enemy are unlikely to rout while they're in the fort. So this is going to be costly at best, most likely. So the battle begins. As you might expect, we are just going to sit at range and try and get some gaps opened up in the fort's wall. The enemy totally swarming over their walls, but they're not going to stay on it like many of our past opponents have. As time goes on and the walls become damaged, they actually decided to get off the walls so that they wouldn't be killed when the walls start collapsing. So a fine decision from the enemy, some of them, as you can see, even going to stand outside the fort, perhaps attempting to avoid the gunfire that's coming into the fort, as many of the shots that actually miss the walls do go over and hit units that are hanging around on the victory point, which is actually pretty useful for us. So after a while I've opened up a gap there, and you can see the enemy have now totally abandoned the walls around it, not going to defend in such a dangerous position, a wise idea, and we're just going to continue our bombardment because we want to open up even more gaps. Now some of the enemy actually came out of the fort. As I started moving my infantry a little closer, exploiting the fact the walls weren't manned, I realised I could have the infantry right outside the walls without taking any return cannon fire. And since the enemy came out, that's basically just going to mean they're going to get shot. So there we go, we routed an enemy camel unit immediately as they came out and faced a whole load of line infantry units. Not 100% sure what their plan was, but it has failed. You can see there a few shots falling amongst the enemies garrisoned inside the fort, and loads of dead animals around the victory point as their camels and cavalry take a pounding from the shots missing the walls, so it's having an effect. I'm moving some of the guns up closer to the walls since we might as well do all this at point blank range if the enemy can't really fight back, but they are going to make one move to fight back. They've got cavalry here suddenly rushing out of the fort towards some of my exposed guns. Now I leave the guns exposed because the AI has never done this, so I just didn't expect them to bother exploiting this weakness. Luckily for me, they actually had second thoughts about it. As I switched the guns to canister shot to threaten them at close range, they turned around and started riding away once again. So that buys me enough time to get the rest of my reserve cavalry over to the position of the guns. So when they decided they actually would go for the guns now, they're easily intercepted by the massively superior cavalry brigades coming in right there. So we're going to attack them, and we can easily surround them as well to make that melee a little bit easier, and the gun can continue its work pounding the enemy's main forts. So the right idea from the enemy, they just failed in the execution, unfortunately. A tiny bit later, we've got some more enemies coming out of the fort, including their commander, who I believe was among these camels who were just wandering out. It looks a little bit like they're coming to try and do a flank attack of some kind, because they're coming out at an angle going around my line, but they're getting shot to pieces by that line while they do that, so they are going to rout away. So another threat easily dealt with by not really having to do anything, but actually they did come back from routing and got that flank attack in. I told my men to go into melee. I don't know why I didn't tell them to go into a square, which probably would have been effective against the camels. I guess my mind doesn't equate camels to cavalry. I don't even know if the game does. So we're going to send in a couple of line infantry units to just fight with the camels in melee, so that's going to be easy enough. We will destroy them. I could even deploy more units, but there are actually lots of little targets in the gaps in the walls my men are looking for right now. You can see some enemy units even forming up right outside the fortification, so we can just go and shoot them in the flank with ease. Now back on the other side of the field, we've got a similar thing happening with camels. Some camels have come out and have started attacking, but this time actually using their ranged attack, and they do outrange my line infantry ever so slightly, so they're doing decent damage. They're very accurate, those camel gunners. So what I'm going to need to do is reposition my lines, which are currently, again, just shooting through gaps in the wall to soften up the enemy's inside, to go and take out those camels. We'll have a couple of units still shooting them. We might as well use up all our ammo if the enemy don't come out to fight us, and then go into melee so the enemy are as soft as possible before we have to actually make that deadly assault. So here we are, a tiny bit later. Those camels were routed by the advance of line infantry to take them out, and we're going to fold back in to get more kills on the enemies through those gaps. Most of the enemies still haven't been deployed, they're still just sitting around in the centre, so that's great, and the guys plugging the walls are being very quickly diminished by this fire, and the ones who decided to form up outside of the wall are being diminished as well. They're not even doing anything, just standing there, taking that fire onto the flank, so that's great for me. We want the enemy to be as weak as possible before we have to do any sort of melee charge into the fort, so it's going well. Eventually though, the enemy decided to send a couple of units to actually come out and come into melee outside the fortress, so that was an interesting development. I didn't really expect that either. So now it's going to be a little bit dangerous for my men fighting that melee, but the fact they've come out of the fort allows me to get a little bit more leverage out of the fact that I have a gigantic cavalry advantage. So I'm going to use my cavalry to join those melees and try and just wipe out the enemy by sheer attrition. Also, because they're outside the fort, they will have reduced morale. Inside the fort, most units have basically infinite morale, but outside, these units are not special at all. when it comes to their morale. Unfortunately, the morale of these camels is pretty good, because we keep defeating them and they keep coming back. So this unit's firing into the back of my men while they're in the melee with the enemy's sallying troops. A lot of the sallying troops, though, actually routed pretty fast thanks to the morale issues I just mentioned, so that's fantastic. I'm going to order my men to pursue them. We want to try and basically destroy those regiments while the rest just sit inside the fort watching, to make this easier and easier. So they're making it easy for me, really, especially because my cavalry are going to have a great time chasing down those routers.
These are dark times, Marathi. Dark times indeed. Our proud nation finds itself beset on all sides by enemies of our sacred cause. To the north, the tyrant Farrukshah sends his Mughal hordes, his tidal wave of green-clad menaces bent on the destruction of our sovereignty and religion. To the south, the Europeans swagger clumsily into a land they do not know, claiming our homes for their king and our lives for their pleasure. Our enemies are different in name, but united in their purpose: to put Maharashtra in chains. We were slaves once before, made to kneel and suffer under the iron fist of the Mughals. But we bought our freedom in smoke and blood. We threw off the shackles of the invader and set about making an India ruled by its own people, governed by its own religions. This is the India we have fought and died for, Marathi. This is the India your empress dreams of. This is the India we will lose if we do not resist. To choose to fight is no easy thing. This I know well. But I ask you all to think of what you have to lose should our confederacy fall. Do you think the Mughals will simply welcome us back into their empire of fear? They will flay every man, woman and child, and hang the corpses from here to Hyderabad to make an example of us. And these Dutch, we all welcomed their trade, cheered when they destroyed our rivals at Mysore, swooned at their honeyed words of promises of peace. And yet now they come with sword and musket, their sweet talk turned to bitter and hollow, and only now do we see their true purpose. They're not looking for friends, dear Marathi, they're looking for domination, to steal our home and harvest, and claim they're bringing us their civilization as fair recompense. Will you be slaves again, Marathi? Will you let the dream of India die here? No? Then come fight with me!
As I chased down the enemy's routing troops, some of them started coming back, including the ever-stubborn camel riders now engaged in melee. Luckily their morale is low, so it was going to be quite easy to push them away. And we did so just in time because the enemy infantry were charging us as well, so we quickly turned these two units to attack as grenadiers and line infantry against these enemy Hindu warriors who are going to be relatively good against us in melee, but our grenadiers are powerful and we have the morale advantage, so we are going to be able to beat them back. Meanwhile, at the fort wall, the gunning down of the enemy continues, and my cavalry really helping in these melees, although since they're so close to the wall, it's kind of hard to organise and get charges going. So what I wanted to do was try and draw the enemy out more away from the fort so they'd have more space. And that proved pretty easy, so you can see I've done it there. Draw the enemy out, and then just mass cavalry charge their ranks. These garrison warriors not going to have a good time against all those cav. They are melee units, so they'll have a better time than line infantry, but still not going to have any chance against that overwhelming power, especially because they break right away. So now as they attempt to escape, they're going to be absolutely annihilated, the enemy's strength being sapped very quickly as full units just disappear in the space of a minute or so. So a tiny bit later, it's time to actually get this attack going. You can see I've put a couple of units up onto the wall here, which are facing heavy counterattack from the enemy. For some reason, they were very focused on this part of the battle, so they sent loads of units to fight with my guys in melee, and they're going to take real punishment up there just because the enemy have so much stuff going up against them. At least it's buying more space and more time for other units to come inside the fort, so I'm starting to give full-on attack orders. We're going to try and take ground, get through those breaches we've made, and hopefully try and capture the fort. But the enemy had forces spread out all over the place, so very quickly it was descending into a classic brawl where just everyone's fighting in melee everywhere and you just have to hope that you win in the end. But what we're going to try and do is break through and get on that capture point, and slowly but surely it's happening. A few units sneaking through the melee, as you can see here, hoping to go and sit on it to capture it before we take so many losses from the melee, just grinding down. We don't want both sides to be destroyed, we'd rather just get this battle over with. The problem is the enemy are starting to redistribute their forces, and my men are getting very distracted by the need to attack these guys, so not helping with my plan, so we're going to keep trying at the very least. The main brawl actually kind of went in our favour after a while because the enemy were relatively weak compared to our heavy cavalry assault, so we were able to hack our way in despite the loss of quite a lot of infantry, but my attempts to capture the point had failed because the enemy put some of their heavy infantry right on the capture point so that we couldn't take it. Very sneaky. So I've got a few regiments firing at them right now, but we need to kill them faster than rifle fire will do. So we need to go and basically melee charge that with as many units as we can. Unfortunately, many units still caught up in melee. We're going to organize an attack on the middle though. We're going to try and ignore the other guys around the edge of the fort. And soon we've got a pretty hefty force coming right for the capture point. So this unit gets cavalry attacked from the front and back at the same time, and then infantry filter in to help with that. And the capture point almost being captured by us right as our men come in, just because of the sheer weight of men we put on it now. So quickly we'll start bringing that numbers down, the numbers of the enemy regiment, sorry, and the capture point will start coming to us. So all we need to do is hold this position. Now the enemy are counter-attacking with more warriors coming there from the left-hand side, but we're just going to rush out and try to stop them getting near the point. Luckily we've got the point sort of behind our little formation there, so it's quite easy for us to defend it from where most of the enemy's men still are. We keep losing the capture though because single enemy troops are walking and standing on it, so we need to finish the slaughter. More units going to come in to help out. At this point, the capture point actually doesn't really matter because we've actually killed so many of the enemy. They're starting to face chain routes. So we actually ended up winning the battle just by sheer attrition. We killed enough of them that the rest fighting on the walls actually abandoned the position and the fight was over. So the losses were heavy in that final phase of the battle. As we can see here from the results, we actually lost a lot of troops, nearly 2,000 to capture that position. But it's perhaps going to be worth it because this province is actually one of the most valuable provinces in the game that I know of right now. You can see that it was some of the infantry leading the attack there with the highest scores, which is quite unusual. Usually cavalry get the most kills among the enemy forces, but I guess that's the nature of a fort assault. So yes, as I said, big profits from this region, a very nice place to hold, and of course very tactically useful because now our rear is secured. It's going to be up to these forces to rush to support De Beer before the enemy can reinforce. The towns were in chaos even before we arrived. Our invasion is yet another hardship for a people who have already endured decades of war. For many, the idea that yet another source of danger has emerged seems unheard of. From what I can gather, the fighting here has been rather unlike that in Europe. It is something further than war, total war you may call it, a war in which there are no civilians. Horrific in its own manner, but amazing to behold from a distance, for when one considers all the destruction the war must have caused, the state of the land and its people seems quite impressive. Their industry seems to rival our own despite the lack of equipment. Humans are their engines. It's almost sad to force them off the helm, for they had sailed well. So with that battle won, we're going to proceed through the next end-turn sequence, and the Ottomans have another battle for us. They attack us with one stag at Istanbul. Very curious considering they had multiple stags available. In fact, there they are on the screen. So not sure what they're planning here, only attacking with a small force. It means the balance bar is even, and we're going to have a pretty good chance at doing this defense, especially because the enemy have lots of trashy troops with low morale, so a lot of their manpower won't be used. As the battle begins, I'm going to exploit the fact I have howitzers inside this fort who can fire up and over the fort wall and just drop shots among the enemy's advancing forces to do some early damage. The enemy brought a few guns themselves, but right now they're blocking their own line of sight, so most of them can't fire, and they are not going to bother using them to try and open up the fort. They are going to go right in for an infantry assault. So the first of their troops will start climbing up, and a few of these early attackers are actually completely ignored by my troops. They just start running amongst our men, whilst my men seem to be reforming. This guy comes in thinking he can defeat this whole regiment on his own. He's going to have a go, but his swings aren't very accurate, unfortunate for him, so he's just slashing at the air. Eventually he falls over. One of my men slashes at the air. Don't really know what's going on. It's so shocking it sends my men into a time vortex and they start moving in slow motion. Overall, a pretty glitchy start to the fight, but now the rest of the enemy's infantry will start coming over the wall to get this battle going. So it's basically going to be a straight grind. Both sides going to take heavy losses here. The enemy unfortunately came through my gate because this weird monstrous creature had decided to open the gate for the enemy. So now, right at the start of the battle, they've got heavy infantry inside the fort. Luckily I had loads of reserves just sitting around back here so we can easily fight them. Plus, I've got two buildings garrisoned with line infantry who can snipe at that melee and cut the enemy down. I'm trying to get my men out of the way basically so the enemy will just be isolated and then we will shoot them since there's not all that many of them anyway. I've also got some cavalry outside the fort who are going to come and just destroy enemy routing units to try and stop them from coming back from routing, otherwise we'll be here forever doing this in multiple rounds. I ordered some of my militia to go up onto the wall, but they decided to go up by going outside the fort and then climbing up the enemy's ropes. Unfortunately, the enemy were climbing down the ropes at the same time as they routed, so they had to queue for it. Didn't mean they could kill the enemy though as they came down the rope, so that's something. You might also notice I put some cavalry defences outside. I initially had the militia deployed outside the fort before the battle began. Anyway, some of the more serious enemy troops started to come in, including the African nomad warriors who are actually good in melee, but they are going to have to contend with a pretty heavily packed fort up top. More monstrous creatures waiting to defend against the enemy's assault. So we are actually going to take pretty hefty losses in those melees, but we have so many troops up there, it's not necessarily a problem. Round another side of the fort, another weird glitchy thing has opened one of the gates, but the enemy didn't use that weakness. They actually put some ropes up and came up the fort, and I'm rushing some troops to defend that position, so that's going to be fine. Another unit went right behind the fort, where they could actually have climbed up the wall and got in where I had no defenders, but luckily for me they just decided not to. They eventually came all the way back round to the other side to get themselves killed. Meanwhile, the fight going okay, starting to see more and more enemy units just giving up on combat, and they have so many of these trashy rangers units coming in that aren't really going to do any damage, then our kills are going to be racking up very fast basically. The swordsmen up top will have killed a lot of my militia, but militia are of course replaceable and they haven't gained any ground. The battle is going to continue in our favour, especially as more and more line infantry can come up and start engaging in the fight since they have higher melee stats. So a lot of these ranged units who have basically no melee stats on the enemy side are going to be killed without losses as the line infantry just storm around these battlements, slashing the enemy apart. That flag bearer having a great time slashing through the enemy's ranks. So the enemy's up on the wall, going to have to deal with the fact that I'm just basically putting every unit in my army at the one choke point which they're all coming through. So there's pretty much no chance for them to advance anywhere beyond a few steps off the ropes, and my men are so packed together that they basically can't even get an attack in before they are killed themselves. So very soon the enemy going to have to escape. My men actually quite generous in letting the enemy escape without just killing them as they try and climb down the ropes. A few of them get taken down, but still very nice of my men. I guess they got bored of the slaughter. There are still more enemies coming up further along the fort wall, but there's basically nothing left in their armies, and now I can just wait to win. The enemy can't kill all the troops I have defending the walls, so there's no trouble in finishing this off. I actually put some of my troops outside the fort at this stage, thinking I need to go out and kill the enemy's cavalry since they hadn't moved, but suddenly their camels did move and attacked me. I pulled back behind my cavalry defences, but for some reason it seems that camels don't count as cavalry. They do just run into the cavalry defences and then sort of phase through them. So that didn't really work as I planned. It means my infantry unit is now exposed, fighting with these guys with only a few of their men actually down from the wall as the rest are still climbing. But the wall is now covered in friendly soldiers who will just blast down into this melee. They can even use the cannons as well. So the camels very quickly rout, and that leaves pretty much nothing in the enemy's army. They still have their guns out here, and they have a few cavalry units, including this one which is just sitting at the back of the map facing the wrong direction. They're actually doing the classic siege glitch of the cavalry slide, where they just slide around the battlefield with no particular objectives. The general nearby just confused at what's going on, no doubt, waiting for this to all be over. So all I had to do was send the rest of my cavalry to go and destroy the enemy's guns, and those cavalry units just chain routed, and it ends in a victory. So you can see we did take pretty hefty losses. The only upside is that most of the losses will be among militia or garrison units, which are cheap/free to replace. You can see there a lot of the losses, militia units. Line infantry units taking losses, a little bit more of a shame, but we'll get them back soon enough. So a superb start to this new war with the Ottomans. They've thrown their forces away. I guess we'll see if they want to use the other stacks next time. The leaders of the Maratha Confederacy, although wrongly believing a Dutch invasion to be unlikely, had also believed that they were prepared enough for the occasion. Reserves of forces stationed far back from the main battlefronts with the Mughal Empire were apt, they reasoned, to delay an invasion long enough for it to be swiftly dealt with. But their calculations had been made against the East India Company of several years prior, which only had a modest land army. Now, with the massive increase in state support for the company, their land army rivaled the entire combined strength of the Marathi before anyone realized just how big the mobilization was. They still had the advantage of fighting on home ground, but that was slipping away. Thanks for watching. We'll get into trouble when the Marathi leverage their naval advantage against us next time on Sinews of War.